more about these archetypes as before we get into our match here. Chris Pikula and Erik Tiernan.
But this is a matchup typically not that great for Delver, for, you know, various Delver decks, but Deathrite Shaman changes the deck quite a bit. Manaless Dredge is not that robust against Deathrite Shaman. It really requires Phantasmagorian plus a lot of action to overpower it. If Erik is on a hand that's just planning on discarding a Dredge card and Chris opens up with Deathrite Shaman, Erik might be in a lot of trouble.
All right, well, we are underway here. Unknown who won the die roll. So if Tiernan had won the die roll, then Chris will know what deck he's on and will be able to play accordingly if he has that availability. It would probably mean he would want to lead on a Deathrite Shaman as opposed to leading on something like a Delver of Secrets if he has the choice.
Absolutely. It's very hard for Manaless Dredge to beat a Deathrite Shaman when they are on the draw unless they have Phantasmagorian.
All right, so, and here is the namesake card, Deathrite Shaman. Do not know yet if Pikula has a green mana, so he cannot necessarily eat a creature. Tiernan is going to discard Phantasmagorian, so that is the card that he's going to play here.
And this is the really powerful outlet in this deck, and the thing that differentiates it from Dredge decks that play with lands. This allows Erik to discard his whole hand, or close to it, because he can respond to the discard 3 cards by triggering it again. It doesn't return to his hand upon resolution, so he can discard 3 cards, in response discard another 3 cards. That's 6 cards in the graveyard. Assuming there's a critical massive dredgers, he can get the ball rolling. Right,
so this is another one of those decks that's not playing by the rules in the least. He is just going to try to discard his hand. This is a combo deck that is designed, Manaless Dredge goes back to the Mental Misstep era. It was designed to be very resilient to counter Magic, and we're going to see that play out here.
And Chris doesn't even have access to green mana right now, simply casting 2 copies of Delver off of his Deathrite Shaman plus his land, which gives Erik free reign to start going nuts.
All right, so the first discard had 3 graveyard cards. It was Stinkweed Imp, Cabal Therapy, and Bridge from Below. All 3 cards that are pretty good in the graveyard right now.
And you're going to see Erik kind of lay out his graveyard in a particular way here. This is because his graveyard is just an extension of his hand. He doesn't even have a deck of cards, really. He just has his graveyard.
Well, normally people put lands out in front, but he doesn't play any of those, so he's just going to lay out most of his graveyard across the battlefields here.
So there's a couple odd Doxiracy and Narcomoeba come into play. Nether Shadow is another differentiating characteristic of this deck compared to other Dredge strategies. This is also the type of card that makes graveyard order matter in Legacy. In Standard, you can reorder your graveyard, your opponent's graveyard. In Legacy, that's a violation of the rules because there's cards that care about the order of the graveyard.
Yeah, you see Erik Tiernan went for a Jataxian Probe, but got dazed by Chris. He's going to go for another Jataxian Probe. This time he's going to see the hand. Chris with a very aggressive start. Multiple Delvers, a Lightning Bolt, Young Pyromancer. Tiernan does have another Dredger, though. This one's Greater Moss Dog. Something that the Manaless Dredge decks have is a huge number of Dredge cards.
They have 2 mulligan hands that don't have a way to dredge. And the deck is horrible at mulliganing because it's trying to discard a hand size. So it needs to play almost every Dredger it can get his hands on. Even though Greater Moss Dog is not the best rate, it's still going to get the job done.
No, he is the 5th best Dredge card. So they've gone all the way down to number 5. Narcomoeba was in play. What Chris is going to try to do here looks like is just going to be to race Tiernan, and he might be able to do it. This was a blisteringly fast start for him.
Yeah, the Manaless Dredge deck is a little slow out of the gates. Even though it's powerful, once it gets the engine humming, it's hard to keep up with. Keep in mind, it takes a little while usually to get the shop set up. It doesn't have Lion's Eye Diamond, Cephalid Coliseum, Faithless Looting type shenanigans. It's slow and steady, and Chris may be able to win just by 6 points of damage in the air.
This is one of the really scary parts, I would think, about the Delver deck here, is that he's playing against a combo deck, and it's possible that with his only disruption being a daze, that Chris is just going to race him.
Yeah.
And, you know, as someone who always plays combo, I almost feel like this is unfair when this happens to me. You know, it's like, hey, I dodged all your hate, and I got raced. Like, can't believe that would be happening, you know? I feel like if I already won the first 2 battles, I should be able to get the game.
Well, can't win them all.
Now, that's why this deck is that scary to play against, though.
And Pikula there with a very sharp play, using the Deathrite Shaman to get the Dread Return out of the graveyard. The battle has been lost on trying to contain Erik's creatures. There's too much going on right now. So his disruption has to be cutting off particular spells. That increases his clock while preventing Erik from doing much of substance and getting the Dread Return there a good spot.
Yeah, so he took care of the Dread Return. Erik, and also importantly, it puts a 2-turn clock on Erik. That was 8 damage, and next turn could be 8 more.
And the last refuge of the damned playing Manaless Dredge took a draw step.
Yeah. It's going to swing with Narcomoeba. And it might be that this start was just too fast for Erik, and it is. Chris Pikula will take the first game.
Manaless Dredge, of all the decks that I see regularly in Legacy tournaments, it stands out to me as being the most ridiculous in a lot of respects. Because even games like this happen, where your opponent doesn't have that much to interact with your graveyard, but takes you too long to get your shop set up.
I mean this in, I think there's a really cool factor being able to play a deck with no lands in it. From a competitive side point of view, I don't see too many advantages to Manaless Dredge over just traditional Dredge.
Yeah, I can get behind a regular Dredge deck because your openings can be so explosive. You know, you see opening hands that involve Lion's Eye Diamond, Cephaloid Coliseum, and Faithless Looting, and can get almost their entire deck flipped over on the first turn.
Absolutely.
That's appealing to me. But the Manaless Dredge is just not nearly as explosive unless it has a hand involving multiple copies of Gitaxian Probe.
Right, they're pretty limited. They're always on the draw, and especially with that's just how they're. Delver can simply race you when they're on the play.
So what does Chris have in his sideboard here? Let's check it out. What does he have to improve?
All right, well, you got to go straight to the graveyard, Hate, when you're looking at this matchup. As is pretty standard, there's 1 copy of Grafdigger's Cage in Chris's sideboard. That's, of course, going to be pretty good here. Outside of that, he doesn't have too much that he can do. He has 2 copies of Pithing Needle that can take care of Phantasmagorian, and does do it in time if it's on the play. He could needle that. But once again, boarding a needle against Manaless Dredge is pretty dicey no matter how you cut it.
Well, the other side of the equation is that Chris is going to have a lot of dead cards here. You know, this is not going to be really that much of a Treasure Cruise matchup because the game's likely to be determined by the time that a card like that's resolving. And a lot of the other cards in here just aren't that impressive, but Daze and Force of Will are powerful against this deck. That's something to keep in mind as well. So if Chris is going to want to keep in his counter spells, which I believe he will, he's probably going to just err on the light side of sideboarding. Erik's sideboard is 15 islands.
Do you think he'll board any of them in?
I do not think this is an island matchup.
Okay.
There's really no way to improve this deck with any sideboard cards. I know that the deck sort of is what it is. There's not a lot of wiggle room to add things, but it's surprising to me that there's literally no sideboard card. You know, if you had 4 Ley Lines of the Void, wouldn't you bring those in in the mirror match at least? I don't know.
There are situations I would bring in a card, but not. It's not that different than a 15 island sideboard.
Yeah, I just had to feel like there's
there's probably
something.
You can construct scenarios where I'd want a different card. Absolutely.
At least turn into a Drakmor salvage, you know? You want to sideboard some lands, at least get a Dredger in there, you know?
Absolutely. I think maybe you could have a different monster right now. He has Flair of the Hatebound as his win creature. There's a chance I'd want to have a different, maybe I'd want an Iona in the graveyard sometimes.
Sure.
I could see cases being made for that sort of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. But as it stands, Erik presenting his same 60 for game number 2. And Chris probably doing pretty close to the same.
Yeah, I'm guessing he switched 3 cards. The 2 Needles and the Grafdigger's Cage. I think everything else would be. I can't see a reason to board into anything else here.
Yeah. I mean, it's possible that he wants Abrupt Decay to have more removal that can kill his own stuff to get bridges out of the graveyard, but he's got bolts already and 4th bolts. He can probably fight the fight over bridge.
If you really wanted to gamble, you could board in Cabal Therapy. If you do it on the play and manage to hit a you could just name, Dread Return, and if you hit it, you'd time walk him. Yeah. That sounds terrible, by the way. I don't think I'd want to do that.
No, I think Chris is going to keep it pretty tight.
Yeah. He's going down to 6 here. Whereas Erik pretty much will never mulligan.
The Manaless Dredge may have the highest mulliganing standards of any deck in the format because mulligans are the worst of all for this deck. It's not just a mulligan, it's a time walk because you have to draw to 7 cards and say go.
You just don't mulligan if you can at all help it. It's very rare that, if you have a hand with no dredgers, you have to mulligan it. But even if it's a weak hand, you keep all your weak hands too because it's not so bad that you want to time walk yourself.
Exactly.
It's okay if your opponent gets the first turn, but if he gets the first and second turn, that's a really big hole you're starting in. Pikula on 6. He's going to go ahead and keep. Tiernan has chosen, of course, to put Pikula on the play.
Legacy full of unorthodox plays. I'm going to take the draw so I can discard the hand size in my deck with no lands in it. This is a lot different than Sylvan Carry added into Courser of Crufix.
To be fair, Manaless Dredge is the only deck that does this in the format. So if your opponent wins the die roll and chooses to draw, you can. He's either a maniac or he's on Manaless Dredge.
Yep. Or most likely both.
I can get behind that. He's going to discard Golgari Grave Troll. Chris Pikula did have the turn 1 Deathrite Shaman, and this time he has green mana to go with it.
So the response here is if Erik has Street Wraith, and he does, now he can get something going.
To be fair, if he didn't have the Street Wraith here, this could just be almost a lights out.
It's almost a lock, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a nice addition to this deck, the Street Wraith and the Gitaxian Probes. Allows it to start dredging on functionally the first turn here. Discard a hand size, then you have these cantrips that allow you to start dredging. And this may allow Erik to overpower a Deathrite Shaman.
Well, what a bounty he got here. He got a Shambling Shell, another Golgari Grave Troll, a Golgari Thug, so he has 3 dredgers. He also has the Phantasmagorian we talked about before, so he can discard his hand in addition to that.
Yeah.
The Deathrite will almost certainly not be able to keep Tiernan off dredgers, which means Chris's deck can't keep him off dredgers. So as we saw last game, Chris is going to have to start shoving damage now.
Yep.
And I think this scenario is why I thought Dredge is good for this weekend. You look at Chris's hand, you see cards like Gitaxian Probe, Force of Will. None of those really do anything right here.
So, and I like Chris choosing the Gitaxian Probe here because I think he was trying to keep it in his hand as a way to have Force of Will backup. But that ship has sailed. Erik's going to easily overpower 1 Force of Will at this point. So Chris needs to find another copy of Deathrite Shaman or something that allows him to start attacking, or his Grafdigger's Cage, something. Because Erik is going to overwhelm Chris in short order here.
Looking at Tiernan's hand, he has Icarid, Greater Moss Dog, Golgari Grave Trolls. He has 2 more Dredgers. He has that Nether Shadow we showed, 2 Narcomoebas. Those are unfortunate for him that they're in his hand. They won't do too much there. And then so what he's going to do, it looks like on end step here, he's going to discard part of his hand, and that's so he can get an Icarid during his upkeep. So I'm wondering, why is he milling all these cards? We're going to see here.
And he also has a lot of cards in his hand with either no functionality or only functionality in the graveyard.
Yep. So he's going to go ahead and the Icarid will eat Street Wraith to reanimate itself. There was a creature on top of Nether Shadow. That was the Icarid, so Nether Shadow will be in play too. He did get to discard a bridge from below here, so when those creatures die, he'll get some zombies. And for the turn, he's going to dredge Golgari Grave Troll.
This deck is a real crackerjack when it gets going.
I mean, it's drawing 6 cards a turn. He did just choose to end step discard 6 for just discarding 6 for nothing.
Yeah, but he gets it all back.
Parse he needs, yeah.
He doesn't have a hand, and he doesn't have a hand of cards anyway. He only has a graveyard. So it's basically draw 6. And then when you dredge, it's another draw 6.
No, and here we see off to the races. This is what Dredge is going to do. He's going to attack for 4. Icarid is going to be flashed back to Cabal Therapy, sacrificed to Cabal Therapy. So he's going to try to strip a card here from Pikula's hand.
Also trigger his bridge.
Yep, he has 1 bridge from below, so he'll get a zombie with that Icarid. Remember, if Chris kills his own Deathrite Shaman, he can get rid of that bridge from below. But with the amount of dredge in Erik's graveyard, that's not going to do too much here. He will almost certainly find another bridge. Tiernan named Force of Will and successfully got it.
Keep in mind, Force of Will and Daze, basically the same card in this matchup.
He's going to sack the Nether Shadow to try to Cabal Therapy again. However, that one is dazed. And Nether Shadow's not going to get to come back next turn because of that sequencing, right? Because the Nether Shadow's on the top of the graveyard.
I believe that is the case, though.
There have to be at least 3 above it, so.
All right.
And sideboard card drawn from Chris Pikula. That is Grafdigger's Cage. That means creatures cannot enter the battlefield from the graveyard.
This card is a mess for Manaless Dredge.
Yeah, it's navigatable for regular Dredge. For Manaless, it's harder. He does still get to have his bridge from below zombies.
But if Chris is able to find a way to kill his own Deathrite Shaman, once Erik finds a critical mass of bridges in the graveyard, Erik may be hard-pressed to win the game. I mean, he's going to have to win kind of with the zombies he's got in play, and
which is only 2 of them.
It's not a lot. There is that one Grafdigger's Cage coming up for Chris.
A huge draw there for Pikula, the one of Grafdigger's Cage. And there really aren't many cards in Tiernan's deck that can do anything at this point.
Yep. The sideboard of 15 islands not really helping that much here, for example.
Right. Well, he can't cast creatures. He has no mana. And yeah, it's just these 2 2/2s. I don't see anything else that he's going to do.
This is why it's so important for decks like Manaless Dredge to pick up game 1. Because games 2 and 3, nearly every opponent in the room is going to have cards like this that are just going to be borderline impossible for you to beat. And you can have a strategy of, I'm going to win game 1, and then one of the 2 sideboard games, my opponent's not going to find one of their Grafdigger's Cages, and I've got a real matchup. But when you lose game 1, the post-board games are going to be a real challenge.
Yeah, Pikula tried to eat that Phantasmagorian to gain life. Tiernan's going to have none of that. He returns it to another Phantasmagorian in his hands to deny the life gain from Pikula. Dredge's Golgari Grave Troll for the turn. But none of these cards that are in his yard are going to do much of anything. It's a swing for 4. Pikula's down to 11. But Pikula will get to start eating creatures to gain life. He's got a lot of time to find ways to answer these 2/2s.
He's just got to block. I mean, he doesn't even really have to. He doesn't even really have to kill these zombies. He just needs to keep his life total high.
Yeah. Young Pyromancer's the play there off of fetch land. That'll be plenty of blockers to take care of these zombies.
Not only has this plenty of blockers, this might just be moat, because Erik may not be able to afford to attack his tokens into the Young Pyromancer, because if Chris blocks and loses his Young Pyromancer, the bridges go away.
Right. Well, but what are the bridges doing for Tiernan anymore?
That's a good question. I mean, maybe Erik might just be very close to locked at this point.
Yeah, I think these 2 2/2s, that's just all that Tiernan has left anymore. Because I don't see the bridges mattering, because I don't see Tiernan getting any non-token creatures in play. They'd have to enter out of the graveyard, which they can't do. Yeah, the one of Grafdigger's Cage. That's something we've seen in a lot of these blue-red Delver decks. It was a very important draw for Pikula here.
I love these kind of high-impact one-ofs in people's sideboards. I was talking to Anthony Lowry a little bit about this too. You know, a Grafdigger's Cage, a Pithing Needle, a Blood Moon in certain decks. Their effects you can definitely draw too many of. But if you have one copy, you're going to sideboard it in all throughout the tournament, and the first copy is going to be awesome.
Yeah, 2 elemental tokens. That means there's enough of a board here for Pikula to trade with both the zombies. And that may just be enough to get the game. A lot of times, a regular Dredge deck would have a card like Ancient Grudge or Chain of Vapor or some...
Abrupt Decay.
Abrupt Decay. Obviously, you can't cast Grudge out of the graveyard on the Grafdigger's Cage, but they'd have something that costs... that would take care, that could in theory take care of this Grafdigger's Cage. Remember, they do play usually some City of Brass or some sort of land that helps them cast a couple spells. He would have a Faithless Looting to try to draw to that hate card. It wouldn't be good. Regular Dredge wouldn't like this either, but there would be a shot.
The upshot of playing Manaless Dredge versus the build with mana is that you're not susceptible to Force of Will because you're just discarding to hand size, and then you get the ball going. Regular Dredge has this issue where often it has one enabler it's trying to put into play, and if the opponent is able to counter it, the hand goes nowhere. The unfortunate part of playing the deck this way is that you fold to resistance. It's very hard to play against sideboard cards because you don't have mana and spells. You just have the stuff that's in your graveyard, and it doesn't permit you to get a Grafdigger's Cage off the table. And now Erik has to find a way to work through this, which might just be impossible. Yeah,
Manaless Dredge can win without casting a spell. It can just resolve triggers, discarding and then dredging and then triggering guys into play. It's not unreasonable.
Chris has gotten some very nice dual lands, it appears. A couple Beta Volk and a Beta Tropical Island.
That last turn, we did see the 2 elemental tokens trade away with one of the zombie tokens. Chris protecting his life total there. He's going to bolt the other zombie token. And now we'll see, can Erik get more creatures into play? Can he do anything anymore? I don't see it, but we'll see if he we'll see what he comes up with.
Well, he can't kill a Grafdigger's Cage.
No,
He has
no way to kill it.
He has no creatures in play. The only way creatures come into play is out of his graveyard. So from where I'm sitting, this is a lock.
Yeah, I would agree. But he may know something we don't.
Yeah, I think Eric's tapping.
There we go. Yep. So 2-0, Chris Pikula is going to go ahead and move on for Erik Tiernan and his Manaless Dredge deck. It is 1-1 today.
Though it's easy to go at the end of that game and kind of laugh at what's going on because the end of the game was such a blowout. If Chris doesn't find his Grafdigger's Cage, the tourney found it, I think Eric's running away with that game. I don't even think it's going to be competitive. But Manaless Dredge, by its nature, doesn't really play well against resistance, and Chris's one Grafdigger's Cage, that just about locks it up.
You see there smiles from Tiernan, and that's the philosophy when you bring something like Manaless Dredge to a tournament like this that you kind of have to have. You know that sometimes people are going to play a hate card and get you, and you have to be okay smiling about those games because the games where they don't get you, you get to smile for a totally different reason.
Exactly. It just is what it is. But when you play these kind of extreme decks in Legacy, you're going to have some matches where you're clobbering your opponent and they have no shot. They're dying with 6 spells in their hand that don't do anything. And you're going to have some games where, you know, if Chris wanted to, he probably could have just decked Erik that game if he felt like it.
Yeah.
It's the nature of the beast.